Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to Tabadlab Live. Tabadlab is a think tank that is dedicated to a public policy conversation that is both politically robust and enjoys the force of evidence and an appreciation for where we're coming from, where we are, and therefore charting out an intelligent and useful, but most importantly, politically robust path forward. The Bad Lab Live is going to be hopefully a regular and frequent interaction between people who've had the experience of making decisions and of helping frame decisions. And today we're really lucky to have three fantastic public policy professionals who happen to be friends of mine. And so I'm really privileged, and we're all very grateful that we're joined, beginning with Madam Hina Rabbani Khar, former Foreign Minister of Pakistan, currently a member of the National Assembly, representing all Pakistani women, but particularly the people of her district, Muzaffargarh. And I'm also honored to welcome Ambassador Mohammed Sadiq. Ambassador Sadiq spent over 30 years serving the Pakistani people through the Foreign Office and her district, Muzaffargarh. Most important assignment was that he was the secretary of the National Security Division, but his most exciting work and where I got to know him was when he was the Pakistani representative, the Pakistani ambassador to Kabul, a relationship that the foreign minister once described as the most important one that Pakistan has. And then finally, I'm really excited and really delighted that Joshua White is here with us in Islamabad. Joshua is the former director at the National Security Council and an advisor to the White House, the Barack Obama White House. He spent the last 2 years of the Obama administration with the White House. And he had the, I think, privilege, although he may use a different word to describe it, of working on Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the wider South Asia region. So thank you to all three of you, and welcome to Tabadlab Live. Just to sort of kick off in terms of where we are right now, there's a regional perspective to this question, and then there's a Pakistani perspective, and there's obviously an Afghan perspective. But the one question that especially a lot of Afghans and Pakistanis and maybe Iranians might have is, what exactly is the American perspective? Because you've been in Afghanistan now for almost 2 decades, and I'm still wondering what exactly it is you're doing in Afghanistan and what you want to be doing. What would make Americans happy in Afghanistan?
You start with the easy questions.
That's right.
We've been there for a very long time. And sometimes in a conflict, you lose sight of why you showed up. I think in this case, Americans actually are fairly clear-eyed about why they showed up. They showed up to prevent a return of militant groups that could reach out and cause trouble to Americans and to the United States. And I think in a way that logic is still compelling to most Americans, even though they wonder, why are we there in significant numbers? Why has this drug on for so long? So the core logic is there, but the debate right now is less about the core logic than whether there is a more minimalist way to achieve those objectives, right? And so I think even though President Trump hasn't said it this way, and the people involved in policymaking haven't said it this way, people are starting to think about whether we can accelerate movement toward a political kind of settlement, and whether there's a way to deal with those fundamental counterterrorism risks with a much smaller footprint, or even no footprint at all in a future world where there's a political dispensation that's favorable. And also to think about what kind of risks we can deal with without being present. What kind of risks can we deal with politically or over the horizon with our other capabilities? It's remarkable that it's taken this long to have that conversation. But I think if anything, the deteriorating security environment, and it is deteriorating, is prompting questions about whether the current course is worth paying for billions of dollars a year for 3, 4, 5, 10 years. Right? And so I think that's the state of the conversation just behind the scenes. And it's anchored in those same fundamental concerns that brought us to Afghanistan. What would we like? We would like to have some sort of stable government in Kabul that roughly reflects the will of the people, that generally is not amenable to providing space for militant groups that don't like us. If we don't have to be there, all the better. There's a view that the United States military really wants to be in Afghanistan. And my Afghan friends in particular, I love them, but they see Afghanistan as the center of the world, right? And the reality is that America does not want to be in Afghanistan. Our army would much
You guys
rather,
have a funny way of showing it.
We really do. It's taken us a long time to really express this. We would rather be doing other things in other places. And it's very expensive. It's hard to get stuff in and out. We don't have a core strategic interest in wanting to have some sort of footprint in the middle of Eurasia, which is not the way Afghans see it. But we really don't want to be there. And so more and more people are looking for ways that we can serve those objectives without a large-scale presence.
One of the things that I find fascinating, Ambassador Sadiq, is, and this really kind of, you were the one that brought this home for me when I was at the Foreign Office and you were in Kabul, was that everybody seems to talk about Afghanistan from their vantage point. I mean, it's an amazing thing that we started this conversation about the future of Afghanistan a few minutes ago, and we were talking about another country's interests and what it would, what would it take for them to get out? What do they want? And of course, Pakistan also has a number of interests, and we'll come to those in a second. But do you find it odd that the question of what Afghans want seems to be a tertiary, at best a secondary concern for almost every single party, including oftentimes Afghan leaders themselves? What explains the absence of agency for Afghan voice and Afghan will in this whole dynamic?
Actually, Afghanistan is a dilemma. It's a dilemma for Afghans also. It's not only for outsiders. Joshua said that the United States want a peaceful, stable Afghanistan where, the groups which could hurt U.S. interests, they are not in power, essentially. That was the crux of the... if you ask me Pakistan's perspective, I'll tell you, we want a peaceful, friendly Afghanistan, right? You ask this question from Chinese, from Iranians, from Indians, roughly it will be the same answer. But actually, this is not the end game, right? When you look at it from the Afghan perspective, if you look at the Afghan elite today, a continuing conflict in Afghanistan is in their interest because they are getting rich, and it's not only the people who are in the government who are getting rich. The business community, the elite, Afghan elite. I would say that about 200 families in Afghanistan are getting rich because of this, and these 200 families are deciding the fate of Afghanistan and the future of conflict in Afghanistan. And it's not only that people who are sort of in Kabul or sitting in cities, they are getting rich. Even Taliban are getting rich. Today, the Taliban movement, their leaders are richer than when they were in the government. When they were governing Afghanistan, they were very poor. We have seen it firsthand. Now they are much richer. They have businesses, they have, So war have made everybody rich in Afghanistan. Everybody who matters is rich because of this war. Why would they end this war? Why would they want to end this war? And then, the problem is with every country in the world, people think that their country is the most important country. I have a map from Fiji, right? And if you look at that map, Fiji is in the center of the world. The entire world is around Fiji because, world is a globe, right? It's like a football. So every point on that football is the center of the world. So, Afghans think that way. They think that United States should not leave. The way, the leftist or the Khar party at that time thought that Soviets will never leave, and they will continue milk that cow. So, the problem is, I think that none of us, whether it's Pakistan, United States, or Iran, or Russia, or India, or nobody sort of is clear about the end game. All of us have sort of some interest. We want to pursue that interest. What is the end game, and what do you want ultimately out of from Afghanistan? I don't think that like United States cannot define exactly what is the end game, why they are there, how long they are going to stay there. Similarly, we also don't know that. I think that we have not decided that, what kind of end game, other than, of course, this very formal, standard policy briefs or policy statements, which actually mean nothing when you sort of go in the field, when you actually see, what's happening and how these things will be concluding. What is the end game? What is the exit strategy? For example, for us, I don't think that we are very clear about it. And
Do you think
Afghans are even less clear,
Sure, but do you think we were ever clear about it? We being the Pakistani side?
I don't think that we were very clear about it, yes. We were living by the day. We were just responding more like a reactionary policy on Afghanistan, like practically everything else. So that is a dilemma. That's a problem. We are facing it. And then, generally we think that we understand Afghanistan better than anybody else. That is, again, another myth, Yeah. We don't understand Afghanistan, honestly. I think that is way more complex for everybody, including for Afghans and for foreign forces there, for Pakistan, for all other neighbors. So I think that we are in this for long haul, everybody.
That's not comforting at all, because when we talk about the future of Afghanistan and we say the Americans don't know why they're there and they don't
Well, if
really...
you want to go to Afghanistan through the garden path, I can take you there. But
No,
that will not be honest.
No, of course, and that's part of the benefit of having a group like this. You asked about, or you mentioned, the hard questions and the easy questions. So I saved the easy one for Madam Hina Khar. You've heard Ambassador Sadiq describe the situation. I guess the immediate question that pops to mind is why? After all of what's happened, and we claim an enormous set of damages. We say that we've paid the price in many ways. Sometimes I think we're not too self-conscious about it because there'll be an Afghan sitting at the table and we'll say, we've been paying the price for the... It's like, well, yes, of course we have, but the Afghans have paid a greater price. But the more fundamental question is why we keep paying the price and why we haven't figured out what we want. If the price has been so high, shouldn't there be a point in time where we actually ask what we're doing there? And when you asked yourself that question, how did you resolve it when you were foreign minister?
First of all, it's interesting because this has been an ongoing, what you call a dilemma, or I would call an unanswerable sort of question, right? And I would like to believe that we have greater clarity on what the end game ought to be. At least I would claim I did have that clarity, and we tried to put it, and he was our person on yes, and the reason why we were able to be relatively successful. And the problem, the dilemma in Afghanistan is that the entry goals, as Joshua also described them, were even more fanciful than what you described them. Okay, so it was by way of Americans' own literature. We wanted to create an Alice in Wonderland over there, and we believed that we could really create this
the Asian Switzerland.
Yeah, literally, quite literally. That we would come and suddenly all the bad guys will go away and we'll collect all the good guys, host a government, and this government will then serve the people happily ever after. Now, nothing like that has ever happened in Afghanistan before or is likely to happen in the near future also. So the entry goals were so, in some ways, delusional that I think that itself kept us from achieving what was perhaps a realistic thing that we could achieve. Now, I do believe very, very strongly, and this is what we tried to do when we were in government, that it is not our business to have an end game in Afghanistan. I'm saying as much as that because it is our interests stop on the borders of Pakistan. That is what, to me, geographical borders represent. That a government within that country needs to have an end game for that particular country. Whatever passionate, dreams you may have, let's restrict them to Balochistan and to Pakhtunkhwa, now Fata, which is also part of Pakhtunkhwa, Punjab and Sindh, right? That is where it ends.
And Azad Jammu and Kashmir.
And of course, Azad Jammu and Kashmir. The problem with Afghanistan is exactly that everybody feels they know what ought to be done in Pakistan. And I remember during our time, and both of you were there, that was the struggle that we were trying to tell the whole world that we have to be around a certain, power base or a certain set of ideas, a certain set of end games, certain set of what is it that we're trying to achieve. And that cannot be determined by the Americans or the Chinese or the Indians or the Pakistanis. It has to be determined by the Afghans themselves. And what Sadiq has described is the answer to the problem, because the Afghans who are now sitting in seats of government and have been sitting in seats of government do not actually have an interest in resolving the problem, because they are currently beneficiaries of a situation which has gotten out of control. And let's not mince words or try and be try and keep ourselves happy by saying that much has not been lost. I think a lot has been lost. And I remember as foreign minister when I went to the NATO headquarters to speak to the NATO ambassadors over there, when you also, Mosharraf, just now talked about how we say we paid a price, the fact is this region has paid a price. We are not kidding anyone when we say we paid a price, because if the end goal or the entry goal was more peace, more stability, less conflict, less terrorism, guess where we are? Or where we were, at least till Pakistan really started off with operations inside, till the Mosharraf era in Pakistan, the other Mosharraf, General Mosharraf, we were trying to just manage the situation and not take them head on, and till that time conflict had increased, terrorism had increased. We did not have, pre 9/11, we had one single suicide bomb attacks, and after that, in 1 year, we had 300 plus, right? And in many years, we continue to have. So the situation for the region clearly has not improved, right? Now my problem, or what makes me less optimistic, is that with the Geneva, which has just happened, with the new representatives which are coming in from the US and from Mr. Dalzoi, who we all know very well, and I believe personalities are important. I mean, I'm sitting over here and I'm saying, if Sadiq was not there as our ambassador, we could not have achieved what we feel we did achieve in the People's Party, vis-a-vis Afghanistan, because we were very clear that we are going to continue to be friendly towards them no matter what they do, right? So the issue right now is that the fact remains that interventions in the last 2 decades, any intervention, my viewers, have not gained us much, right? And perhaps what we need to do is revisit the terms of intervention and how we do those interventions. And maybe the new age and the new world is not offering us great opportunities in the traditional way of doing interventions, which are against, sometimes we use tools which are against international law, and we then become bigger than our boots, right? We become bigger than the UN and whatever. So we're breaking all the rules and trying to correct. So we become like thugs. We become like, people who have power, who are going to try and fix the situation without any rules of engagement with. And we, frankly speaking, at the end of the day, people who suffer the most are the people who are on the ground, are the poor Afghans who are continuing to be living in refugee camps, who have no source of living within Afghanistan, who are at the literally center of the conflict, whether it's between the Afghan government or the Taliban and the other forces who are all trying to. So every country, whether it's an immediate neighbor or a faraway neighbor or a country sitting oceans away, seems to have an interest in this country. And this is unfortunately, it's been an historical fact.
This idea about, because in a way you alluded to it as well, and of course Sadiq Saab talked about it more explicitly about the Afghan elite. I mean, this is an argument actually that gets used against Pakistan as well, that the Pakistani elite, of which, fair to say, this conversation is also, in many ways, it's an elite conversation. That the elite in Pakistan and the elite in Afghanistan, they don't really like their people, and they try and squeeze, other countries and extract rents. I mean, this is the typical Washington, D.C. beltway kind of narrative about Pakistani elites and, frankly, about Afghan elites, but it gets buried under people's animus for Pakistan these days. Fact of the matter is, whether it's the Afghan elite or the Pakistani elite, they actually have suffered. There isn't a member of the Afghan elite who hasn't suffered a family member dying. And a family member dying, in most cases, through terrible, brutal circumstances. The Pakistani elite is under the gun. I mean, we've had incidents in this country that really undermine the sustainability of the Pakistani model. Of course, Pakistan is a lot more fortunate than Afghanistan, and by accident of history and for many other reasons. But I wonder if it's, Joshua, I wonder what you feel about this kind of line of arguing that we need other people to care about the poor in Afghanistan or the poor in Pakistan because the elite don't take care of them. Because frankly, one could turn that around and say to the American elite, you guys bankrupted, grandma's pensions to save, AIG and Wall Street. And not once. I mean, you guys keep doing it. And then you elect, governments that essentially serve the very same interests that keep getting bailed out. So I think if we start playing the elite blame game, then actually every elite in every country is pretty exploitative. How do we get out of this kind of merry-go-round of tagging others with the responsibility when actually there needs to be probably a little bit more of an assessment within the elite of each country as to how they've engaged their national interests in a place like Afghanistan?
Yeah, the American elite have a lot to account for, and I think in our recent elections, this has been a big part of the discourse.
Yeah.
You know, you were exactly right when you called out my representation of the U.S. objective in Afghanistan as being narrower than originally construed, right? And I think what I was identifying is a sort of the core thread that runs from days after 9/11 to the present day. But your point was important because we have gradually, not of our own volition, but out of a sense of realism, scaled down our ambitions, step by step by step, to the point where our ambitions really are, and I was a little bit oblique about this, but I can be more explicit.
That's why it's an hour, because we're going to draw you out.
Right. A government that does not collapse.
Yeah.
And can hold Kabul and the major cities, right? A government that's not riven by internal infighting, right? A government or a sort of constitutional construction that doesn't, dramatically reverse the gains that we've seen that are important with respect to health, education, and gender equality. But even that, by that standard,
But
the objectives
I want to challenge you.
Are falling away. But let me tell you, our objectives are narrowing very significantly to focus simply on how we achieve the core narrowest objective for which we came. And when you have a narrow objective like that, you end up engaging less with the Afghan people at large. And you eventually end up engaging less even with the elites. And I think we see this in the process now of talking with the Taliban, where the United States has said, not only are we not going to engage as much with the broader civil society conversation, but we are going to sort of take the bull by the horns, talk with the Taliban, and keep the Afghan government in the loop on this, but not wait around for the Afghan government to come up with a clear, coherent, directive approach for doing so. And it's in many ways unfortunate, but it is a product of narrowing our objective.
Okay, so I think that's exactly what Hina earlier alluded to.
Mm-hmm.
When she said we become like thugs, I should clarify what she was saying. She's basically saying Ambassador Khalilzad goes into Afghanistan and with no care or consideration for the national unity government's own objectives and its own list of interlocutors, basically engages a whole range of actors and goes to 8 or 9 different countries talking about this other country. So I think you've kind of described in softer terms what the former foreign minister just described. But I wanted to challenge you on whether this narrowing is like from 9/11 to now, because I think this narrowing is every time there is any point of inflection in Afghanistan. I remember distinctly, and I know you do too, and I know Sadiq will, and Hina will too. We know for a fact that when the first Karzai term was ending, there was a massive fallout between him and Peter Galbraith. And I remember the way that Eikenberry used to talk about the whole situation in Afghanistan, and I know all 4 of us do. Then we remember the second Karzai government, and the exact same dynamic took place. By that time, the ambassadors didn't matter as much, and the military leadership of the U.S. basically openly contemptuous of President Karzai, and like stories being leaked to the press about some nasty stuff about like drug abuse and all the games that we're used to in Pakistan, because every elected leader ends up having some story or the other. Our stories start in the first 2 or 3 months of being elected. In Afghanistan, you guys used to get tired of them closer to an election, and we see it happening again now. I mean, I've rarely seen the kind of disrespect. And this is for all countries, and not just the Americans. The kind of disrespect that is being meted out to the national unity government in the way that they're being treated by the entire international community. Why? Because suddenly, everybody's got a crush on the Taliban. The same Taliban that basically were responsible for hosting the 9/11 attack planners and financiers now are being charmed by the same country that actually was attacked by the 9/11 attackers. So to me, I'm a little bit like, what just happened here? And if I'm feeling like that, I can only imagine how young Afghans would be feeling. How do we respond to that? Is it just a cyclical thing? We have a lot of hope. We bring in Ashraf and Abdullah on a national unity government construct, because otherwise the thing was gonna go to the dogs. Now there's another election coming in April, and we're tired of Ashraf Ghani, so now we're running around doing the thing that the minister just said. Is that former minister? Is that fair?
I don't think it's entirely fair.
Okay.
No, I don't think there's a lot of, I forget what, you didn't say love. There's not a lot of charming going on between the United States and the Taliban. I think this is a very unsentimental calculation by the United States that if we were to continue to pursue a policy of Afghan-owned and Afghan-led talks, we would never get to the Afghan-led part. In part because of the divisions within the Afghan government, in part because of, I have great respect for Ghani. He's brought a huge amount of energy to his job, but he tends to micromanage processes. And in part because any meaningful negotiations probably have to be small and for the most part secret. That is how peace talks start and gain momentum. And then at a later stage, you expose them to the light of day and you expose them to the various interests. But the idea that you can have an engagement between the United States and the Taliban and a very large, loud, complicated Afghan polity, I think is unrealistic.
Okay.
And so I think this is a concession to reality, even though the signals that it sends are really challenging.
Sure.
The signals that it sends to the Afghans.
So here's what's really funny about what you just articulated. Since 2001, October 2001, the Pakistani position, the private Pakistani position, but one that's well known and owned publicly when it needs to be, is that Pakistan has been asking the Americans to do exactly what Joshua just described. Now
we're a little slow.
If somebody had a love child in 2001, that child would be 18 years old right now. He'd be driving. She'd be driving, hopefully.
Yeah.
So here's my question. Finally, the Americans are doing exactly what we've asked them to do. Our children have grown into adults in the meantime, but no problem. Finally, the Americans are on the same page as the Pakistanis. What is our problem now?
Actually, I look at it a little differently. United States was always in touch with Afghanistan. They were talking to them. They were meeting them in Doha, in other places, but they did not make it public. Only thing which happened with Khalilzad now is, they are making it public. So essentially, I'm sure Joshua is very well aware of it. There were contacts between Taliban, their Qatar office, and the United States. But like till this year, United States was very careful. They did not want to annoy the government in Kabul. I think that now finally, the United States has concluded that they have to do it directly. And they can sort of, they can annoy the national unity government in Kabul and they can still get away with it. So I think that's the, this is how I read it. Because at least I'm aware of more than 20 contacts between the United States, US officials and Taliban. Yeah. But, they were never made public. Now, problem for Pakistan, like, when I was ambassador there also, when I was dealing with that, then Secretary National Security Division also, and now, of course, after I'm unburdened, from these official responsibilities and can talk more frankly and openly, Pakistan's problem is nobody wants Pakistan in Afghanistan. Let's be very honest about it. I cannot kind of sort of pinpoint a single country which would welcome us in Afghanistan. They don't want to see us there because we have occupied a lot of space Especially in past, we had occupied a lot of space in Afghanistan, and we lost it. We are losing it, even further, and this vacuum is being filled by other countries. Now somehow the impression of the world about us is our influence is bad, is negative. We fail to change that perception. We fail to change that perception. What is our problem? Like Pakistan was given credit when last Eid al-Fitr, the truce, Pakistan was given credit for that publicly. Although Ashraf Ghani did not give us credit that much, and he tried to take that credit himself, and because that annoyed Taliban actually,
Yeah.
because he sort of the government spokesman started saying that, well, Taliban are weaker, therefore they accepted this truce, and that was a bad thing to do. Nobody's talking about it in Afghanistan or here, or nobody's probably analyzing it. But the moment the spokesman started saying that, Taliban backed off. And although there was an unannounced truce on Eid al-Adha, it was not announced, but much low profile and not publicized much. But I think that initiative was lost because of the impatience or over enthusiasm of the Ashraf Ghani himself, and then the Afghan spokespersons. If credit were given to Taliban, and if they had said that, well, Taliban sort of did something positive because they're Afghans and they want peace in Afghanistan, therefore they came. I think that things would have been different. Not much different, but slightly better than where we stand today. Now, the U.S. military leadership, they are making public statements that Taliban are very strong, we can't defeat them, they can take over Afghanistan. I think this is also a bit of exaggeration, probably, I don't know why, but probably putting pressure on the Afghan sort of unity government, the national unity government, probably putting pressure on Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah and all that. Well, Taliban can create a lot of problems. They are controlling parts of Afghanistan even today, and they can control more parts also. And firstly in Kunduz, and particularly in Ghazni, they have proven their capability.
Yeah.
But the response was very strange because, it was known for weeks that they were gathering in three places, three sides of Ghazni. They are gathering and they were preparing for an attack, but nothing was done to stop them. And they entered the city and they literally butchered the elite Afghan forces, a unit of 100 topmost, most of them trained, I think, in US. Yep. They butchered them, all of them. It demoralized the Afghan National Army. It was demoralized already, and it demoralized them very because that was very strategic, I would say that. They targeted the special forces, which was pride of Afghan army.
Exactly.
Afghan army, and Afghan army thought that, well, they can defeat the normal unit, but they can't defeat them. And they killed them, actually, not defeated them. They literally wiped out the entire unit. So I think that there are issues which you cannot explain why these things happen. Well, and then now in world capitals, Afghan representatives are received as diplomats, accepted as a kind of future government or something. So it's getting more difficult. It's getting messier, and
it's also. Just on the point, sorry to cut you off. I think you're absolutely right. It is getting messier. One of the places where it's getting messier is within Pakistan, because as a Pakistani, when I hear Sadiq Saab say, all the countries in the world, they don't want Afghanistan, they don't want Pakistan in Afghanistan. You know what I think? I think, wow, that's interesting, because Afghanistan is way up all over Pakistan. Afghanistan is in Peshawar, it's in Quetta, it's in Lahore, it's in Islamabad, it's in Karachi, and I could go on because I would need to say that 2.5, 3 million times before we've counted Afghanistan and Pakistan. The point isn't that Pakistan shouldn't have opened its doors to Afghan refugees, especially for me personally. I think there's a number of reasons why Pakistan's refugee policy is actually something we should be very proud of. And we've discussed this before, so this is kind of a setup, but I'm amazed at how much Pakistan has done and how little credit Pakistan gets. Why is it that Pakistan, which has been this amazing, warm, unbelievably generous country to its Afghan brothers and sisters, finds it impossible to get one positive sentence out of those same brothers and sisters when somebody asks them, hey, what do you think of Pakistan?
Okay. So So the answer is very simple. And honestly speaking, I think theoretically and practically, if we are able to unbundle everything, things are not as complicated or complex or impossible as they seem. So when Sadiq says, I find it very interesting when Sadiq says that nobody wants Pakistan and Afghanistan. If Pakistan was smart, the last thing Pakistan would want is Pakistan and Afghanistan. Okay, wanting Pakistan and Afghanistan has been the most flawed, and we've had many flawed foreign policy objectives. But this has been my favorite, most flawed foreign policy objective that has been incentivized by military regimes in Pakistan. Okay, so this concept of strategic depth has literally given us everything wrong in this country. Okay, our love for that concept, which is a completely flawed concept, because we also started saying during our tenure that we don't want a friendly government. It's not necessary that it be a friendly government because it's within its own borders.
Yeah.
We want a stability is what Pakistan wants, right? Prosperous, yes, we will hope eventually prosperous. But wanting Pakistan and Afghanistan is the last thing that Pakistan should want, because it is what has in some ways destroyed the very fabric of Pakistani society. Wanting to play a role, you see, because I always like to look at the Afghan problem from a Pakistani lens, and I think what we did trying to restrict the Soviets, stronghold or presence in Afghanistan has had an impact on Pakistan, which we're still suffering from, right? Because we are, as I've always said, both in government and out of government, we were the only country in the world which allowed the Afghans to come in freely, not restricted to any refugee camps, but all over the place, fair enough. Gradually, sort of,
If you had been in charge at that time, would you have allowed that?
I believe being selfish is the most profoundly unselfish thing you can do to anyone. Okay, so your job as a government or as a country or as a state is to defend your own national core interest, and the national core interest requires you to be first protective of the people who are your responsibility, which are people which are within your borders. You are friendly, you are correct humanitarianly towards the Afghan people, but you allow them to come in through a legal process, stay through a legal process, and then create the circumstances, or when the circumstances are created, allow them to. Because you see, it's quite nice because our Prime Minister recently made a statement, and I am very humanitarian on it. Okay? I'm very, very humanitarian.
I can vouch for that.
Yes,
I can vouch.
on the fact that all Afghans should be given nationalities. And my question was, have we done our homework on ensuring that the people who currently have their nationalities, such as the girls who have been born in Mosharraf, have the right to education, clean drinking water, and health? That we're taking on the responsibility of ensuring that we are giving more citizenships to people who. So you're being unfair both to your own people who are currently residing within your boundaries and to the others. So this seems to be a problem which has been made far more complex than if really everyone, including Joshua's country, were to mind their own business and do. And by the way, let's not be philanthropic about it and cool about it. In terms of largesse that now we are just suffering from a lot of exhaustion and fatigue, and therefore every country in the world is now, taking off the gloves, taking off the mask, and saying, let's deal with whoever is the real power. Because I may hate the Taliban, whether they reside in Afghanistan or in Pakistan. I have no love lost and refused for Pakistan to become their spokesperson, and I think we have enough witnesses in this room to say that Pakistan is not the spokesman. But if they are a reality in the landscape of a certain country, and if you are a reality in the landscape of a certain country, you have troops there, that country's territorial integrity and its sovereignty, etc. You have troops over. So then saying, oh no, we are not going to negotiate, and we are negotiating, but we're not going to. So let's, cut the crap, come to the table, say it as it is. Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, very nice. All of us have been saying it, right? We need to get the work done, and for that, because I want to say it because it's been 10 years I've been saying it, that when you go into negotiation, what is the problem? Why have negotiations been very unsuccessful? I just want to make two important points over here. First of all, till today, despite a lot of changing dynamics, the US stated policy on Afghanistan and peace and reconciliation in Afghanistan, the last stated written policy I saw was President Trump's statement, which he read out, which seemed to be institutional too. Secretary Pompeo was quick to retort on Foreign Minister Qureshi's comments that this policy still holds, right? So we're playing on the periphery right now, taking off the gloves, etc., trying everything. But as far as the real policy, the stated policy. So we're still testing the waters. And I was surprised in that policy because after 17 years of being in there, when you say something like, after having tried military options, we will perhaps come to, yeah, after having tried, what are we talking about? So it's all going to come down to getting minimum goals and objectives which are achievable. And secondly, you cannot enter a negotiation process without having anything to give. I've been saying this for the last 10 years. What is it that we are willing to give? This question we've been asking us. We shouldn't be major players, right? But the Afghans and the Americans who have presence over there, what is it that you're willing to give in this negotiation? Because you know what you're holding today, you know what you want from the, but what is it that you're willing to give? Have you put that on the table?
Can I just speak of this? This is a hugely important point. And for years, the United States, particularly the Defense Department, which has a lot of interests in Afghanistan, has told the diplomats within our system, go ahead, talk to the Taliban however you see fit, but don't put our stuff in play. Okay? And at the end of the day, if you do a basic analysis of the conflict, the Taliban say they want us gone. They probably want other things, but I do believe them that more or less, caveat, they want us gone. So unless we are ready to sit down and say, here's where we are, we're willing to put some of those, our presence, our posture, where it is, what we're doing in play in a negotiation, we get nowhere. And this is where I don't have a lot of wonderful things to say about President Trump, but I do think that this dimension of the US approach recently is welcome, because for the first time there seems to be some pressure within the US system to say, let's look at what we have, let's look at where we are, and let's put some of this in play, right? Because you're right, you can't come to a negotiation and just tell people what you want, particularly when the balance of power is slowly eroding in favor of the other side, which it is. The Taliban are slowly gaining territory and influence, not dramatically, but gradually and visibly. So in such an environment, it's completely unrealistic to just demand. And so I think this is beginning to happen. One challenge is that President Trump has stopped reporting how many troops we have in Afghanistan, where they are, and what they're doing. So it's a little difficult to say we'll reduce the number when nobody knows what the number is. But there's a process in play to actually move into a real negotiation.
So, it really scares me when Americans talk about leaving, because Pakistan has suffered a superpower leaving before. It's all well and fine, as you were saying, and you know that I'm a huge advocate of that. I mean, we have to be internally accountable. We're answerable for our own country's situation. I think all of us agree, and we feel strongly about that. But to pretend that like Pakistan just woke up one morning and decided to be in Afghanistan, that's not really what happened. The Soviet Union, the big red machine, came and drove a truck bomb into Pakistan called Afghanistan, and it blew up. And we've been dealing with the consequences. So, and then that wasn't the worst thing they did. The worst thing they did was the conclusion of the Geneva Accord was not exactly the way it should have been. It was not inclusive. The thing that Pakistan was saying about the Taliban for the last 18 years, Pakistan was also saying about the PDP government. There's this impression that the Pakistanis were always against Najibullah and everything. It's factually incorrect. Pakistan wanted the Mujahideen to talk to Najibullah and to create a genuine Afghan-led, Afghan-owned situation. But the Soviet Union had to run because Mikhail Gorbachev was doing, what was it called? Perestroika?
Perestroika.
Right. And here we are. It's 4 decades on from 1978. This is the 40th anniversary this year of the catastrophe. It started in December, and this is December 2018. And 40 years on, now we're hearing another great superpower. I've always believed, in many ways, a moral superpower that is invested in the immoral urgency to get up and leave without actually leaving behind something that won't destroy Pakistan further than it already has. So from a Pakistani perspective, and especially from an Afghan perspective, because the worst years in Afghanistan, I think by consensus, were probably 92 to 99, or 2001 if you want to be American about it. Is there a chance that you're going to do to Afghanistan what the Soviets did?
There's a chance.
Okay.
And I'm probably about as scared of that as you are. You know, there's a policy dialogue in Washington that's very strange right now. And it basically, on the one hand, people who say we have to stay the course, just keep doing what we're doing. On the other hand, emerging voices that say we should leave. And I think it's dangerous to frame the problem that way, because at some point, if policymakers, people in Congress are told you have the choice to keep doing what we're doing or to leave, leaving starts to look kind of attractive.
Yeah.
Right? Because why would we keep doing the same thing and expect a different result, right? So a binary policy choice actually makes it more likely, in my view, that President Trump or somebody else says, look, let's pull the plug. The problem is that when you begin talking about things outside of this binary choice, things that are uglier, things where you don't get everything that you want, things where you have to maybe twist some arms in the Afghan government and other regional partners, right? It creates some political turmoil and people wonder what's going on. But I would rather be in that ugly space than a place where we pretend that we can keep doing what we're doing, just keep shelling out money, and it's going to be okay.
So I think I'm on the same page as you, but I wonder whether maybe we haven't learned any lessons from being in the ugly place, because in some ways we've been in the ugly place now for one full decade. Because it was in 2008, you'll remember, that the conversation started about some sort of a resolution and an exit. And a lot of Democrats, especially progressive ones in the US, were really excited about what Obama was going to come and say at West Point. But over the course of the 3 months leading up to the West Point speech in 2009, and that was also in December, we know what happened. We know that President Obama basically didn't cave in entirely to the kind of John Nagel end of things, but caved partially. And so the surge in Afghanistan was neither a surge, nor did it do anything for Afghanistan. It kind of put us in that ugly, messy place that you're just talking about. In many ways, we're still kind of there. Is there, maybe, Sadiq Saab, is there any merit in just pulling the plug?
I think that the United States is not going to leave the way we sort of thinking about Soviet Union leaving Afghanistan for a number of reasons. Number one, it's not only the Afghan elite, but there are very strong parts of the Afghan population, they want the United States to stay there. And United States, did a lot of negative things, but contributed positively also to at least parts of Afghanistan, at least half of the Afghanistan. Like they have better roads today than ever before. They have more schools. They have more universities, health facilities. A lot of positive things also have happened.
I mean,
so much
young
money.
Afghan people, they're totally different. They're so confident and talented. In parts of Afghanistan, not the entire country. I would say that in about 30% of the country, the young Afghan people have changed actually, but not like territorially, not across the board. But you have these strong pockets of support for the United States there. So there is no real pressure on the United States to leave, because it's not Vietnam where there's a lot of pressure, or it's not Soviet Union and Afghanistan where they were getting beat bad, and the entire world was fighting there. It's not the same situation in Afghanistan. Secondly, United States have paid the price, the maximum price in blood and treasure already. What is happening now? The price is very low for them. It can retain that. It can retain the occupation or stay in Afghanistan for. So it's kind of like the marginal return, the marginal cost.
The marginal cost. Now the cost is very marginal, and then the problem with the United States is the average age of a policy is between 6 months to 1 year. The policy changes.
Sure.
So if you are there for 18 years,
they're 18. Our secret.
Yeah. So you can wait them out. You can wait them out. Then Taliban also, they understand that they cannot run over Afghanistan. They cannot control the entire country. There are certain benefits Taliban are getting from this war, and the U.S. presence there. So I think that the United States is not going to leave. Maybe they'll reduce their numbers there, their number of troops. Then they will increase it again, reduce it, stay only in the bases, maybe continue staying there, like providing training to the Afghan forces or civil servants and capacity building. But these things will happen. But the United States is, I think I think, going to stay there, and the sort of the neighboring countries have to sort of gear up for that, and they have to keep that as a given in their policy towards Afghanistan.
But maybe that explains, maybe that explains the. I mean, in a sense, if the Pakistani security establishment in particular has kind of made a calculation, the kind of calculation that I think quite rightly Sadiq Saab and Joshua Saab both have said, then what incentive for disruption does the Pakistani state have? Why should Pakistan sort of somersault backwards or forwards to try and enable a process whose outcome isn't guaranteed? If our analysis is that the process is just meant to be a process, it's just about rolling over the tide, getting past maybe April, which is the election, maybe the election in India, because of course for Pakistan, the India factor is a vital one. We haven't talked about it much because I think it often doesn't get talked about in the right way. But India does have legitimate interest in Afghanistan, and Pakistan does have a legitimate interest in checking that. So if there's no clear outcome, what incentive do we have as Pakistanis to prompt our leadership, civilian and military, to come up with a definitive answer? What do you want? Because they'll say, hey, let the big guy decide what they want, and we'll figure out what we want when they tell us what they want. And this kind of poker keeps going on.
With your permission, I could say just 2 sentences. Actually, practically, Pakistan is now practically saying publicly that you do not want United States to leave. Actually, we are now saying it.
Yep.
We are saying it privately before, but now, practically, this is what's happening. It's actually the repeat of what when the Soviets were leaving,
Yep.
and we were telling them to delay their departure.
Yep.
So, we are actually.
We're back
to the.
Which is why I brought it up.
Yes,
and which is why it scares me that Joshua says that if the momentum, see, the pressure isn't on right now, and the pressure isn't battlefield pressure, but it could be that a year from now, there's like a Washington movement across both Republican and Democrat, conservative and progressive, both pushing the administration to just yank.
But leave, but maybe reduce their numbers, And do you think that Iran wants the United States to leave? No. Russia, do you think that they want them to leave? Do you think China want them to leave? So why should Afghan want them to leave? So like, you have to keep that in mind.
So that's very different than their stated position.
Of course, yes. Stated position are different, yes.
So I'm going to like to believe.
Right.
I seldom disagree with
Right.
Sadiq, but I'm going to disagree. And I'm going to like.
I did it. I finally see. My big thing was why does she keep listening to the Foreign Service? Right?
Simply for the reason that, listen, we all talk about, okay, there's a perfect world which is unachievable, which is Alice in Wonderland, and then there's a slightly imperfect world which is perhaps achievable. To me, the slightly imperfect world which is perhaps achievable is this region finding some regionalism. Okay, because without that, every country, including the rising, shining, now quite unsecular India, each one of the countries which are part of this region will continue to suffer until we're not able to find some regionalism. Now, I don't need to give you the examples of ASEAN and European Union, which is now unraveling, NAFTA, which has unraveled thanks to Mr. Trump, etc. But they saw this good time, all of these regions, because of the fact that there was very minimum hostility, and they were able to somewhat go together in the search of economic interest versus political animosity, right? Now, my belief is, and I hope this is not like, that you will continue to create paranoia in the minds, hearts, and behavior of every regional player, which includes, let me name them, Pakistan, China, Russia, some of the Tans, Iran for sure. So all the major players. Now, the only exception to the rule of the US staying in Afghanistan and the other country, which is a regional player, being happy with it, is India. Guess why? Because India is part of the containment of China policy. And a lot of people who will like to be conspiracy theorists will believe that the US would not perhaps want to completely leave, as in take the bases out, etc., because of that factor, perhaps. That it would just, because it has a presence, perhaps like to maintain that. My genuine belief is, and as I said, this is not an Alice in Wonderland belief, that till the time the US, every country will have a reason to say why this region is not peaceful. At least statedly, right? Iran, China, Russia will have reason to delve into conspiracy theories why this region can't work. So there is a reason why there is a reason why there is sort of remedy, territorial integrity, every country. So then Afghanistan becomes a satellite state of the US. So now when we say all of us are paranoid about the US leaving and Pakistan is now, as Sadiq is saying, perhaps stating also that the US...
Not paranoid, actually.
No,
Yeah, okay, yeah.
It is a bit of concern. Okay, at least concern
Not-
about the
no,
security situation.
No, I think that all these neighboring countries, they see a benefit in the United States stay in Afghanistan.
Because they feel the security situation will deteriorate.
Maybe China would think that way. Yes, maybe China. Like Iran can hurt the United States only if they are present in Afghanistan.
For all the
Russia,
bad reasons.
yes, for the bad reasons mostly. Yes,
so that's what I'm saying. Whether you look at it from paranoia or for having an excuse to act badly.
Right.
Okay, so if these are the two reasons that everybody wants the United States presence in Afghanistan, I think these are very bad reasons, right? And eventually, much as it is clear that we are not anywhere close to a very stable Afghanistan on its own, but that's the only real solution, right? So if we're not moving towards it, then Mosharraf, it's not difficult to reach the conclusion that we are again moving in circles. And we have moved in circles for 40 years, okay? So the cost of not doing anything different is very, very high. I looked at missed opportunities as very costly, okay? And as foreign minister, I've had the privilege of looking at the missed opportunities vis-a-vis Pakistan and India, the Rajiv Gandhi, Benazir Bhutto signing, etc., okay? And decades pass by and we degenerate worse and worse in our animosity, in the soup of hatred that we create ourselves. I think this region really needs a clean break from that, okay? And I think this region will only get a clean break if these half-bred solutions and this being forced out, etc. Do I think it's possible? Currently, no. Okay, because I don't think we're all smart enough, sage enough, or mature enough. And I think a very good example is what you said, that every time, I think as Pakistanis also, we need to ask ourselves the question, if from the last 18 years we've been telling the world what is perhaps the correct solution or the correct advice in Afghanistan, why has the world not believed us?
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that's a question needs to be answered.
So let me, I think just to kind of wrap up, Joshua, and I'll bring it back to you. In fact, I was going to sort of frame this for you. Hina just said that, we're not mature and wise enough, and I think she's right. I think India is actually behaving incredibly unlike India. There's nothing sort of Zen or yoga about the way India is behaving. Pakistan, of course, is a very young country. I think Pakistan can be forgiven for being worried about its territorial integrity given its history. It can be forgiven for worrying about what happens in Afghanistan given the refugee sort of challenge. But there is one country that actually is quite mature in this region, and I think the question about where the solution is going to come from or who the disruptor or the guarantor is going to be, I think could be China, which then loops me back to the paranoia that I'm not sure Uncle Sam would ever want a situation in which this multi-decade crisis is resolved visibly by Beijing.
I think you're wrong.
Really?
Yeah. I think that the United States has been relatively pleased with China's modestly more engaged posture. And that if by some miracle China decided to be much more engaged to the point of taking some of the burden from the United States, helping us with the transition, I think we'd be happy about that. I don't think it's likely. I don't think that's how China rolls. That's not what they do. But I don't think we would be displeased to see that. So I want to say, finally, I very much think that a regional conversation is important. I think that a regional solution, it's sort of it's a truism, is the only solution. But I also think that for so long, people in the United States have made a regional solution or regional understanding some sort of prerequisite for moving forward in engagement with the Taliban. And I just don't see the history of peace negotiations working that way. You need the few people in the room hashing out an ugly but maybe workable solution, and then you expose it to the wider community, you see how they respond, and then everybody else thinks whether they can live with that imperfect solution.
And do you think the Khalilzad process offers us that window?
I think it offers some window for that. I mean, the reason I have trouble being really optimistic is because even if we get to a somewhat ugly solution, the balance of power has eroded, and it's not going to be a solution that looks very good to us. to be honest. And it's not going to look very good
Presentable.
to the Afghans. It's not going to look very presentable to the region. But you know, in a long-standing conflict like this, the only success you're going to have is coming up with a relatively ugly solution that everybody can live with. And I think that we have, in a more realistic way than in the past, moved toward a process that is trying to.
So final question then for you, Joshua. So before April, you see some kind of a compact being achievable?
Not before.
Khalilzad thinks that it should happen before April, because in April there will be new elections, and then you have to wait another 5 years or at least some few years. But actually, the reading of these talks, like sort of between United States and Taliban, they're quite different. From Taliban side, you hear different things. From United States side, you hear different things. Khalilzad is way more positive. He was just in Islamabad last week. He's way more positive. It seems that, but well, he's a diplomat. Maybe he has to put a kind of a brave, or positive, or happy face on it.
Well, that's what Khalilzad thinks. But what do you think?
But Taliban are doing what they were doing before. They have not backed off. Look at the attacks. This is December. Normally, Decembers you don't have attacks, and they are actually engaging in spectacular attacks. And they're targeting hard targets, not only soft targets. So the message is very clear. Taliban are saying we'll do whatever we are going to do and make concessions to us. And the United States at least has come to a point where they are ready to sacrifice the national unity government and have an interim government, which was a major Taliban demand.
So is it likely before April that this whole setup would be?
No, I don't think so.
So we're in a battle of attrition at least until April.
Yes, it will continue. Some sort of there will be a lot of positive noises, but I don't think that there's going to be much change in the ground, because the U.S. demand would be, before they dismantle this current setup, to stop the hostilities or stop the attacks. I don't think that Taliban are going to agree to that. That will be difficult for them to agree to, particularly when you reach March, when the fighting season starts.
Exactly.
In April, So at that time, it will be very difficult to kind of bring Taliban to. I mean, they are already talking now. So in a way, they are sort of on the table. But stopping hostilities, stopping attacks, terrorist attacks, or hitting hard and soft targets, I think it will be difficult.
So I'm actually a lot more positive than either of you. And I'll tell you one reason why. Sadiq Saab just called Khalilzad a diplomat. But when it comes to Pakistan, Zal is anything but diplomatic. What I found remarkable about his appointment is that he has managed what has come out of his mouth and the people close to him with remarkable discipline. And there hasn't been a single moment in which he's conveyed any kind of negativity towards Pakistan. I think Pakistan's willingness to release the people that were released is actually a big step forward. And I think Pakistanis should take credit for that. But some of the credit also belongs to whatever diplomacy was happening behind closed doors. I don't know if Zal deserves the credit for that or not, but his success and his discipline suggests to me that it's okay for me to be optimistic. Would you be okay with that assessment, or are you with these guys on April being sort of a cutoff point, and whether some accommodation or compact can be achieved before that?
I think some serious ground will be gained in the up till April, because I think the seriousness, I hope at least, some sound bites, some sounds of more seriousness than ever before in really finding a solution. But I think the solution that will be found right now will be so ugly that it will be unsellable for the position that the United States currently have. So you will probably need to see some worsening of situation for the appetite for a ugly solution to be more acceptable. Just talking like a realist.
Well, on that realistic note, this has been as always, even with you guys individually, it's always such a privilege. But I think this group really, I found it enlightening. I hope that the people who have an opportunity to watch the entire conversation will feel the same way. I deliberately set up the question about April because I'd love to have the three of these folks back, and we can revisit these assessments, the realistic ones and the hopeful, dreamy-eyed, optimistic ones. With that, thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Joshua White. Thank you, Mohammed Sadiq. Thank you, Hina Rabbani Khar. It's been a great pleasure. This is Mosharraf Zaidi signing out from Tabadlab Live. Thank you.